Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Clear Values podcast. Today, it is my pleasure to be speaking with my friend Nathaniel Hancock, who has quite an interesting background, you might say, in relation to bodybuilding, powerlifting, and various other pursuits that involve struggle, strain, challenge, adversity, and overcoming. And I thought this would be a really important conversation to have to learn from Nathaniel's journey to get his wisdom in the process of overcoming and how we can achieve as well through that particular way of being. So, Nathaniel, welcome to the Real Clear Values podcast.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me today.
I've got to say it's interesting. It was interesting talking to you. I listened to one of your other podcasts that you were on recently. We've known each other for a couple of years now, and it was interesting listening to the sort of the breadth of experience that you've got in relation to bodybuilding, fitness modeling, powerlifting, all these different pursuits that involve making yourself better in some respect, physically making yourself better. So, where did this journey all start for you? I guess you started bodybuilding before powerlifting, is that correct?
Yes, and I actually began distance running before then. So
Wow.
I was about 9 years old when I did my first distance race, and then began training and did my first marathon at 14, which, thankfully my parents were open to that. I know a lot of parents tend to be a little skeptical of that type of distance at younger ages, but for me it was very much flowing from an inner need to push myself, to learn about myself, to try to develop improve self-mastery, right? I was kind of a hyper kid in need of attention. I would define, boy Nathaniel, and certainly many of these aspects remain a part of me today in my late 40s. And then I think the other piece to this that I haven't talked about in other podcasts probably is that my father is a political philosopher. Okay, PhD from Harvard University in political philosophy, and very much focused on the question of the good throughout eternity. What is written from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle to today on this question. And for me, one piece of the good, capital G, is absolutely um, lifelong learning, right, and growth. And I feel like trying to live a good, fulfilling life and becoming a more useful human being to those around me is always going to involve both study and practice. And so the physical arts to me, so to speak, are definitely important. And I don't know if I'd say as important, but they work together with the intellectual and spiritual arts.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that. A marathon at 14 sounds like something. It's interesting, yeah, looking at your bio. I mean, in terms of just your bio in terms of progress that you've made and achievements that you've made elsewhere. So you did the marathon at 14, but then you got into bodybuilding and you won lightweight Mr. Utah in 2000, placed top 10 in the weight division at Mr. USA in 2001, drug free, which is an important addition to say there as well. Not having any of that assistance, if you like. And then you've obtained sponsorships as well. You've also been a fitness model and a cover model, 17-page spread for an international fitness magazine in 2000 as well. Which magazine was that?
So it's called Exercise and Health. It was, and I later found out they did about 150,000 issues that were published throughout the world. So it was pretty neat to have that happen while I was in the middle of my university studies, and to have friends, coming up to me on campus, telling me about seeing it in the store and such. Definitely surprising for someone who, I'm a social being, but I would never say that I was like intensely popular or had a billion friends or something like that. But they were simply telling me that they were surprised by, not knowing, oh, I didn't realize you did that. I didn't realize your physique was to that level,
Mm,
which is normal, of course, because you don't go around campus in your posing trunks. So,
yeah,
anyways, a fun period of life.
yeah, brilliant. So how did you get from that, from running, from doing this marathon at 14 to bodybuilding then?
Yeah, so my sports pursuits have been varied, and actually football, or soccer as we say in America, was a really important one to me for many years. where, especially through my high school years, I spent a lot of the year thinking about games, visualizing success in soccer games, and leveraging cross country running as part of my strategy to be a more effective player on the field. I very much wanted to be, I played striker and also right wing. And I very much wanted to be the type of player that my coach could use the whole 90 minutes and feel like I was given 100% every second of every minute. And so my conditioning off season and during season helped me to do just that. Um, Now, after playing at Utah State University for their men's soccer club team, I was a missionary in Paris, France for 2 years, and when I returned, I changed universities to Brigham Young University, which had and has, I believe, a superior club, which was therefore harder to make. And when I was cut from that team, it was kind of this decision point. I had to pivot. I'm not going to be able to play football, soccer at the same level anymore. I still played intramurals, as we call it, but that's when I decided nobody could cut me from bodybuilding, and that I could put all the attention that I wanted, that I'd formerly put into my cardiovascular abilities and my technical skills on the field, that I could invest into the gym and see how much learning I could do. On the one hand, I do love reading, and then putting that into practice and talking to professional nutritionists and coaches.
Yeah, that's an interesting transition because usually when you talk about things that involve, real physical strength that are quite individualistic, they seem quite antithetical or not necessarily antagonistic, but they seem quite opposed to, something that's like a team sport. It's like it's usually like one or the other. But you went to something that was fairly, would you say it was fairly individual when you went into bodybuilding, or did you become part of a team?
I'd say it was quite individual. I mean, my mentors, the more advanced folks who were helping me behind the scenes were
Mm,
very important to my success, and I continue to thank them. Folks like John Henry Jorgensen and Shannon Kennard, without whom I would not have had the success that I had in natural
mm,
bodybuilding. But by the same token, I knew, and part of what the pull was at the time was I knew that my investment would reap dividends. So
mm,
so I felt very much like I saw very closely the tie between you put in this much hard work, learning, training, and you reap this much in terms of benefits. And so in a life where control is an illusion, this is coming from somebody who's moved to many countries and many states over years and just had a lot of shifting challenges, as we all do in life. I found in bodybuilding, I found a place where to some extent, I had control over the laboratory.
yeah, yeah. So it's very much an individual pursuit where it's you against you. Is that fair to say?
Yes. And that truly, like, moving on from, I would say, the more juvenile perspective of I'm trying to beat, or I want to be better than this person or this person, towards this is the quote unquote objective standard. It doesn't matter, who it is that's achieving that. This is where I believe my possibilities lie.
Hmm.
And then, of course, you hope to change those beliefs where they become further and further.
Mm.
Um, but having kind of more objective standards, and just simply getting that next PB or personal best become what you're pushing for, as opposed to, submitting the adversary.
Mm.
To use
Yeah.
a jujitsu term, maybe. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, that's great. So I just want to draw a distinction out here, Nathaniel, because not everybody listening will appreciate the differentiation between the two. But what's the difference between bodybuilding and powerlifting? Because
yeah,
you switched, didn't you, from being a bodybuilder to being a powerlifter. So what's the
yes.
distinction between the two?
So first and foremost, I do have plenty of respect for folks who practice both sports. I want to make that clear. In my life, I found that bodybuilding was not viable for a long-term solution to my, physical growth, physical pushing needs. And part of the reason for that was yes, performance enhancing drugs. I just saw that the landscape did not was not really conducive to somebody who was looking to stay natural for life, which I was and is and am. So, but beyond that, it's really a question of aesthetics, right? Bodybuilding is all about subjective judgments from your professional judges at meets, where they're looking for a balance between how ripped you are, leanness, how large you are, size, volume, and then how balanced you are, how aesthetic, how it all flows together. And of course, every judge brings his or her bias into that equation. You can study, which I did, uh, dozens of pages of manuals that judges use, and still be somewhat unsure on meet day who they will pick first and second. And meanwhile, powerlifting is all about objective strength. How much can you squat? How much can you bench? And how much can you deadlift? And so, and beyond that, it's not your body fat percentage that matters at all. And therefore, you can live in such a way that you're not married to the kitchen 24/7, measuring, your avocados or tuna or whatever it is, things that I did in my life for quite some time. And so it enables you to have a more flexible existence while still being very serious about your sport.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like what you say about that objective measure as well. The idea that with bodybuilding, somebody's judging you against a fairly opaque set of criteria as well as bringing their own bias into it. But with powerlifting, it's either you do this thing or you don't do this thing at this particular level, and that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the criteria. So I think that that's an interesting way of looking at it. And yeah, I heard you say something once about how powerlifting related to your family life as well, and you were talking about how it was more amenable to, or it's more conducive to your family life and commitments there. So tell us a little bit about that and how that influenced your decision to switch.
Yeah, again, I think, each one of us, whether we recognize it or not, we have a certain internal hierarchy of values, right? And I think it's good to spend time trying to delve into that and to further define that, and maybe to even ask ourselves how much of our life is truly in line with what we claim to care about, right? And to value. And so for me, because my faith and my family come very much before any other pursuit that I'm after, I wanted to make sure that I was there for them, that I am there for them as much as humanly possible. And so, again, this transition from bodybuilding to powerlifting made sense to me because I am still able to reap the benefits, the physical and emotional, intellectual benefits from the sport, while not having to obsess 24/7 about it. So, for me, I've defined this elsewhere, and maybe you heard this, Tom, but I see for powerlifting, I'm a huge proponent, when I'm doing it, when I'm right now I'm running, but when I'm competing in it or not, I love powerlifting because I found that both the acute benefits and the long-term benefits are tremendous. The acute, I tend to talk about the endorphin release, which for me has been, I'd say, far more significant than any other sport that I've done, even distance running. And so I really felt like I could take any difficult day at work or interpersonal related and go into the gym and transform it almost without fail, based upon the quality of my training session, to where I came out with a different mood, perspective, openness to the other. And so that's where I would say the acute immediate benefit of powerlifting in my life has been. And the more long-term benefit is what I sometimes call virtuous cycles of um, self assessment or self vision, right? Where it's like you start to believe that if I train really hard for this long, perhaps this is my ceiling. And then all of a sudden that ceiling becomes, you don't just beat it, it becomes, you know, banal. It
Becomes
just
you
beat.
becomes your floor instead of your ceiling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in one way, for example, the 405 bench, the 4 plate bench, was for me something that I thought was maybe impossible for my genetics, for my being drug free and everything. And then I remember the first time I hit it, I actually hit it quite with a lot of strength to it. And within a few years, I was doing 6 reps at that weight. And so that was just one example of many where I saw my personal beliefs of what of that of which I am capable completely transforming, and then having me question, why do I think that I'm not capable of this in the workplace, or outside of work? um, Maybe I should be thinking bigger elsewhere. And so for me, that's a gift from powerlifting that I have not only benefited from in my own life, but I think that I've been able to give to other people as I've defined it and help them have experiences in that same vein.
Yeah, it's interesting how that belief can apply across domains. So you have that idea of what you're capable of in terms of limiting yourself to this certain ceiling. Then you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, you keep training. Then you surpass that, you exceed that, and then all of a sudden you think to yourself, well, why can't that apply in other areas of my life as well? Why does there have to be a ceiling in relation to my career and other aspirations as well? So I love that. I think that's really powerful. I think that's a core benefit of doing things that require some sort of struggle and some sort of pursuit. So let's talk a little bit about role models and mentors. What role of role models, people that you've looked up to from afar, what role have they played in your journey thus far, and how have mentors come into play at a more personal level as well?
Yeah, this is a great one. I mean, I have several names that come to mind immediately, for different reasons in my life, and so hopefully we can pull some of these threads in ways that interest you and your listeners, Tom. But so one of them I've mentioned. It might sound cliche, but I've mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger before, because of course he's a huge international name, and people might have different opinions of him and such. But what I find most impressive about Schwarzenegger in 2025, now he's in his mid 70s or whatever it is that this is an individual who I think is exceptionally gifted at being narrow-minded when it comes to his own goals and vision of his future. And he's been able to very much bat away every critic every time across very different fields, from bodybuilding to acting, obviously to politics, etc. And again, he's not a perfect man. He's made some very public mistakes, that have cost his family and others, and I'd like to think pretty open about that. But what I believe I can learn from him is both persistence and self belief are going to be beneficial to any human being on this earth, and are going to open doors that otherwise would not open. Um, so that's one that comes to mind. Obviously, I mentioned my father earlier, Ralph Hancock, again, who I see also as an incredible example of passion and lifelong pursuit of learning, where I just, ever since I was a child, I've known him to constantly be seeking out and reading the best books, and then writing about them, thinking about them, writing about them, talking about them, speaking publicly about them, to where, now he's in his mid 70s, right? But he's this is how he will live until he moves on to the next world. And I think that a commitment to lifelong learning is something also that benefits every person on this earth, and yet that many people shrink away from and decide to live, how should I put it, in an armchair intellectually, um, for many decades of their life. They might say, "Hey, I've got the career that I need. I'm making ends meet or something at, I don't know, 30 years old. Therefore, I'm going to, just milk that cow and until it's done or whatever." But I don't believe that that is fulfilling the measure of our creation, so to speak. So, so again, Schwarzenegger is one from one perspective. My father's another. And then there are many other mentors, such as Ian Burgess, who's in his 80s, a powerlifting mentor, who I've just been so impressed by his also persistence and his giving back to the community, right? Where it's like this person, Ian lives in the Columbia, Maryland area, the United States of America, and has been competing in powerlifting since the mid 60s. You think about what that means, right? Where so, he was born in Glasgow, in the 40s, and found powerlifting in his 20s, and then literally well beyond my entire life has been in the gym through all sorts of life challenges, and has then turned around and shared those lessons, life lessons and powerlifting lessons with others. And I find that to be a beautiful way to connect and to help other human beings. So those are just a few mentors, personal or celebrity wise, who come to mind right away.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's an interesting breakdown of what you shared there. So first of all, you talk about Schwarzenegger, who very much is dealing with the brawn of things, if you like, in terms of his singular focus. That's the thing, not just his resilience, but also his singularity of focus in terms of getting the task done. It's like he won in relation to bodybuilding, powerlifting, etc. I think he was bodybuilding primarily, wasn't he? If that's not,
Yeah,
if I'm not,
he started as a
yeah,
powerlifter, then a
okay.
bodybuilder, then an
Yeah.
actor. Yep.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So it's like he started off with these physical pursuits, but then he transferred that success, or rather he applied the principles behind the success in those domains to other domains, and then it went on from there. So I think it's interesting how you share, examples of role models, from different domains, So we've got the brawn, we've got the brains of your father and that commitment to ongoing learning, the continuous pursuit of learning and intellectual growth. And then this idea of your other mentor as well, who is about contribution, about giving back. So it's three pretty interesting areas there. It's like, building foundations of physical strength and resilience, persistence as we talk about, but then also the intellectual side of things as well. But then ultimately that leads to contribution. So an interesting breakdown there. So in terms of your own journey, Nathaniel, I know you've had some setbacks along the way as well, and you've always been, like you say, you've been pursuing higher ceilings, so to speak, breaking through those ceilings. That then becomes a new floor for you, but then you pursue higher ceilings. How what sort of obstacles have you faced and had to overcome on your journey in powerlifting, and how have you overcome them?
So a very easy one that seems to resonate with a lot of people is, first of all, intense injury, and recovery from injury. So physical injury, obviously, is what I'm talking about in this case. But I had a torn ACL from a football or soccer match in my 20s, which required really 2 full years of doing everything in my power in order to get back to where I was before. And it took total commitment in times. And anybody who's been injured, seriously injured, understands what I'm talking about. Where just learning to walk again, and do all the things that you did before the injury requires a lot of focus, and for you to do things at a high level requires study and assistance, and persistent focus, right? Where it can't be for a week or a month, but really it's something that, like I said, it took 2 years before I felt 100% back, in terms of my right knee. And then in my powerlifting years, this would have been 2000. I was two weeks out from the meet that was supposed to be my breakout meet, where I was thinking, okay, I'm so strong now, everything's coming together in training. I'm going to finally, make a name for myself. Not that anybody cares again about these worldly pursuits, but and then I'm in my last heavy deadlift session at the gym, and I've got two different videos rolling. So I do have this footage available still, and my left biceps tendon pulls right off the bone while I'm training with 575 pounds on the bar. and the deadlift. And immediately, I put the bar down. I know that I'm injured. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I know it's serious. And thankfully, I've got this PT, this physio, who sat down with me and immediately diagnosed the issue and told me basically like this is going to require surgery and let me get you in touch with a surgeon right now. I bring up this story about my left biceps tendon coming out, not to disgust anybody, but to say that I'm very serious when I say that physically that pain was not a huge deal. And I'm not saying this to try to be a tough guy. I mean, I'm sure, other people have the higher pain tolerance than I do. But the psychological burden of saying to myself, I've just strung together 10 years of incredible powerlifting training to get to this point, and I was right on the cusp of breaking out, whatever in my mind I had built up. And then to feel like, not only is that not happening 2 weeks from now at this meet, I don't know if it will ever happen now. And so those days following that injury and before the surgery, probably even after the surgery, were very challenging, kind of self-searching days where I was having to ask, what does this mean to you? What are you willing to do now that this is your predicament? And I think, I have many weaknesses. I would say a strength of mine is that I committed to not choose victim mentality and to believe in my possibilities for the coming years. And those 9 months following that surgery were some of the greatest months of training I've ever had in my life. They were different. They looked different because there were many things that I couldn't do. I was training with one arm for the first 3 months, for example. But it's amazing to me that what the human body is capable of. I mean, again, within approximately 10 months of that surgery, not only had I gotten back to all my normal training, I had surpassed all of the strength records from my former life. And then a few years after that, I had far surpassed that. So it both made me grateful, for the physio. Um, it made me grateful for the surgeon, and then it made me grateful for those around me. In this case, at Iron Ground Gym, and later at Dark Horse, for people basically just giving me encouraging words and saying, "It is so inspiring to see you in here with a sling." Basically saying like, "I will continue to rage against the dying of the light," so to speak. And that's what I chose, and
Mm.
it was a beautiful journey. So.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting how you talk about that choice that you made. You chose not to be a victim, and I think a lot of people could listen to that and think, "Nice, that's a good choice to make." But then they might ask the question, "Well, how did you effectively, in reality, not just kind of deceiving yourself in this, but how did you
Yeah.
genuinely choose not to be a victim in that situation?"
So during my like the very first day that it happened, I sat down at my laptop and I wrote an article that I think I entitled it "Turning Setbacks into Launch Pads for Future Success." And I still look at this article. I still send this article to other people because it was written from a place of like I was so raw emotionally, and yet it was coming from knowing that all the passion that I had the rest of my life wasn't going anywhere, right? It just because my body was broken at the time didn't mean that I didn't still have all the same energy to put towards what I view as, righteous, worthwhile endeavors. And so I had to try to ponder and to study and to look at others and decide what is in my power right now. And I thought to myself, okay, in many ways, yeah, this is a setback. In some ways, this is a blessing. Let's think about that. And I said to myself, this is a blessing because all of a sudden I've got all this time to study. I can become an expert truly on different arts or sciences, that are tied to powerlifting, whether it's physiology, whether it's nutrition, whether it's training protocol, human response, my individual response. So I did spend more time in that world then I said, okay, I can also work on, maybe I can work on some of my cardiovascular system that I haven't been hitting as hard as I've kind of put those things to the side. I did interval training on stationary bikes where I never would have done that in my earlier powerlifting years. Again, with the sling on, and I just told myself, because I can't use this arm, I'm going to do everything else and put all the focus on everything else. And so, I started, my squat actually went up. I was doing one arm benching with a dumbbell on the right side when I couldn't do anything on the left side. And I view it as also a miracle of the human body that I'm sure somebody out there can define this scientifically, but I promise you, like when you are injured on one side and you do everything you can on the other side, you do uh, at least prevent atrophy, and maybe even to some extent, you're still able to cause some real anabolic response. Because within, I had my surgery around Thanksgiving, so late November 2020. By March 2021, I was back, repping 3 plates in the gym on the bench press. Like that to me is an absolute miracle. I'd had a sling on just a month or two before that, right? So I have to believe that when we choose to see a setback as a pivot that can give us, more perspective, and then enable us to fill in gaps that we had not taken the time to fill in, that can be a tremendous boon to our life, even if it looks different than we had hoped.
Yeah, even if it looks different than we'd hope. That's an interesting phrase because it's often the expectation that causes us pain. It's the expectations that we have of
Yeah.
how this is going to look. We get so fixed on a particular future or a future that we have in mind that doesn't then transpire. That's the thing that can really set us back and really cause us to feel like the victim. But like you say, focusing on what you can do. So instead of being able to do this stuff with your injured arm, you're instead able to do other things with the other side, also with the cardio side of things, also with the intellectual learning side of things as well. That's a really good, a really strong answer and really good guidance to people who are in a situation where they can't have the ideal, they can't have everything, but they can have something, they can do something as well. Now you've used some interesting phraseology there and some interesting words, righteous endeavor, a blessing, various other things. You are a man of faith, and that's the context in which I know you. So how does your faith relate to, or how does the powerlifting, well, how do they relate to each other? How does your faith and powerlifting, how do those two things relate to each other?
So I'd say first and foremost, again, hierarchy of values. When I say faith is first, I do believe, biblically, for those out there with any type of Christian background or notions, you'll probably be familiar with the two great commandments, where we talk about loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. And and for me, like, those are always going to be much larger, much more important, umbrellas to anything else that I'm trying to pursue. Um, at least I hope they are. I'm trying to make them as much. And if anybody listening to this, would like to call out my hypocrisy, please let's talk. I hope to be humble and amenable to such a conversation. But so yeah, loving, and for me, loving God means appreciating that I have, I believe, he's my maker, he's also my father, and he's both omniscient and omnipotent. And so I am a finite human with weakness. And there are many times, like all of us, where I think I see what's best for me and I want to embrace a certain path. And then, of course, I have some challenge that can feel outside of my hands, some context that I'm missing, especially with other individuals, and not understanding, what is going on in their calculus, and really having to humble myself and attempting to. And I understand this can feel a little bit difficult for someone not plugged in to the spiritual life, but to attempt to receive from the heavens light and knowledge that I don't have from man. And that, again, that's a driving force in my life. And I have, what we call in our faith tradition, Tom, a testimony, or I have a belief that this learning the language of the Spirit or the Holy Ghost is something that is fundamental to my day-to-day life. Um, Training is an important part of my life, but very much, I'd say it is an important part of my life, and it's in my life because I feel that it's helping me with these other priorities, which are primary.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, you talk about God's omniscience and omnipotence. Omniscience, of course, is all knowing. Omnipotence is all powerful. So it's that idea that that you have a Father in heaven, a maker that knows better than you and is stronger, more powerful than you, from whom you can learn. I think it's interesting as well, just speaking on the faith side of things and some of the correlations and the parallels, if you like, between these sort of physical pursuits and the more spiritual side of things. Like, there's a phrase that I particularly like in the faith, which is all truth may be circumscribed into one great whole. So the idea that there's there are true principles all over the place, and you can see them anywhere, right? You can see them almost anywhere. You can see them whether it's playing football, whether it's um, martial arts, whether it's powerlifting, whether it's exercise, whether it's intellectual pursuits. These different principles are evident and apparent in different ways, in different contexts, to different applications, but the principles are still there, and they exist and they operate, and they are kind of like the rules of the game. So the more that we know, understand, and apply those principles, the more effective we can be in achieving our objectives in whatever domain those things are. So what are some of the principles then? What are some of the learnings that you've got from a spiritual context that you've then applied to powerlifting and your success in that pursuit?
So again, not knowing who all of your listeners are, I want to make sure that I say this in a way that makes sense and that you can relate to. Friends, I'll call you friends, even if we haven't met yet. But I'll just use a couple concepts from Scripture that I hope you'll be open to, regardless of what your belief system is. Are what I would call, one is the concept of being past feeling. So being past feeling, meaning that you are basically hardened emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, interpersonally. You've allowed the difficulties of life, which yes can be crushing, and I say that from experience, friends, right? Um, but you've allowed that to say, I will become hardened as opposed to softened to trying to learn and listen to either the other or to the above, depending upon your belief system and what it is. So that's a touchstone for me, is trying to avoid being past feeling in my life, choosing vulnerability even when it hurts the most. And I mean, frankly, the Johnny Cash slash Nine Inch Nails song "Hurt," right? Like, to me, even though it's about drug use, I understand what he's talking about, right? I hurt myself today to see if I could feel, right? Basically saying, like, I'd rather feel than feel nothing at all. I want to live that way. And I say that again, having been humbled to the depths by challenges in life. I still choose that, and I hope you will as well. So on the flip side of that past feeling concept, which yes, I'm cribbing from scripture, is the concept of being willing to submit. And I know that word submission, sometimes it's a huge turnoff to people. There's a book that I read when I was at Brigham Young University called Bonds That Make Us Free by Terry Warner. I love that title, Bonds That Make Us Free. Again, I realize that a lot of people, the second that they hear the term bonds, or they hear submit, or they think, or even for some people, they think religion and they think of oppression and force and blind sheep. Um, that is the opposite, both of my experience and what I believe. And I just want to share that again. I'm not trying to change anybody's mind about my faith or faith in general, but I do want you to consider in your life. Um, Am I choosing to be vulnerable and sensitive and to learn from above and from others? Or am I choosing to shut off and to push away because of the pain, which is a huge part of life? And then on the submission front, um, when and if you get to the point where you believe again in this all powerful, all knowing Father of us all, I mean, that to me is a beautiful thing because if you're able to feel communication from prayer or in other ways in your life, then you can say to yourself, I will not submit to any man or any person on this earth, but I'm happy to submit to the person who knows me, loves me more than anyone else, right? And by so doing, I will become more than I could possibly be otherwise. So I think those two kind of touchstones, um, avoiding being past feeling and choosing to be willing to submit, equal for me emancipation from basically the addictions and personal foibles and desires of every person, right? Like you don't have to look far. So I was in downtown Leeds today, here in Yorkshire, in the UK, and I was with my daughter, who's 12 years old. And as happens almost every time I'm in downtown, I like Leeds. So any Leeds folks, don't be sad when I say this, but I'm always going to run into somebody who's drunk, somebody who's high, and and it pains me. It pains me. I understand. Like I'm sure that they've had very, very difficult lives, right? But I don't think I'm better than them. I am grateful to not have succumbed, at this point in my life, to these versions of escapism. And there are many other versions as well, many other addictions that take down otherwise brilliant human beings. So for me, my faith is a helpful reminder to avoid trying to give in to those um, escapisms that do not promote lifelong learning and development and becoming, and instead are detours which can very much bring us down to become miserable beings.
Yeah, I think there's some very important points that you make there to draw out, Nathaniel. And I've said this before. I know I have. I'm sure I've said it on the podcast before. But one of my favorite scriptures or sayings in the Old Testament is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I think it's so powerful. And people say, "Oh, fear." And again, like you say, "Oh, well, you don't want to be, you don't have like, you don't want to submit, you don't want to be fearful, you don't want to be scared." And it's really not about that. It's about understanding. For me, anyway, it's as I see it, it's about understanding the true order of things, the true hierarchy, who is really in control, who really does have wisdom, who really does have power, and who really does care about the well-being of us, the well-being of his children. So there's a lot to think about there, but I think you're right in terms of it being a choice between, do we choose to numb ourselves against the pain of life, the vicissitudes of life, which are present for everybody to a greater or lesser extent at different times, or do we choose to find purpose and meaning in those things in order to strive for something better? Do we believe that there is something better to be strived for? Do we believe that there is a better future? And this is, again, another Old Testament scripture that I love, which what you say makes me think of, is where there is no vision, the people perish. So without vision, if people don't have a vision, people don't believe that their future can be better than it is right now. It's like in anything. It's like with you, with your powerlifting, me, with my martial arts training. If you or I don't believe that we can be any better than we are right now, then what's the point? You might as well just give up and quote unquote retire and say, oh well, this was the level that I attained and that's it.
Yeah.
You have to have a vision of being able to be better than you are and have faith in that vision to keep going again and again and again. And that, like you say, with your examples of the folks you've come across in Leeds, it's the same thing with life. The people have a vision of life that is better than where they are right now. And the temptation is, I think, the temptation is based on short-term eradication of pain or discomfort. And I think the more pain and discomfort we can handle, the more able we are to make progress, the more able we are to transcend the existing limitations that we face and then move forward. There's something actually you shared with me the book The Fighter's Mind by Sam Sheridan, and you shared your notes on that as well. And there's something that I picked out from that which I thought was really that really struck me actually, and really struck me as true, and really struck me as particularly valuable to share. And it's a quote which reads, "Suffering and struggle are the ways to truth, to understanding." And I think that's true. Not to be too circular about how I express that, but I think there is truth in that, that suffering and struggle teach us to understand not just ourselves, but other people. I also think as well, we can think about ourselves. We think, well, I'm in this really bad situation. I have a better vision for the future. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to apply these principles. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to make progress. But then there's another side of it because then we can become better. We can become stronger. We can become happier, more joyful, more resilient with a much stronger core and a much stronger foundation, much stronger baseline as well in terms of what we can handle in future. But it does something else to us as well, doesn't it? It enables us to then, as the scriptural saying goes, to succor the needs of others. So if we see someone else in a situation, I've got a friend whose wife is particularly sick at the moment in such a way that it really hit me. And it hit me because I know what it's like to I know how it is to feel when your wife is particularly sick and there's nothing that you can do about it. And so I was able to empathize with him and have compassion for him in a way that I otherwise would never have been able to do so because of my own experience. So these things give us experience to build ourselves up, but ultimately the purpose then, going back to what you're saying about your role models and mentors, ultimately, yes, we build ourselves up and become stronger, but then what do we do with that strength? Ultimately, it's about contribution, isn't it? So just going back to your powerlifting, Nathaniel, the powerlifting is good for you. This is helping you to become stronger. How does it help you to be better for other people?
Yeah, so the way that I did powerlifting, or at least how it transformed, since 2011 when I started, was really from initially, there were things calling to me like, oh, look, here's the bench press state record for Maryland. When you get back, I was in Germany at the time. When you return from Germany, you'll be prepared to beat that record, which I was, great. That's kind of like this little interesting plus. But then over time, I found, shall we say, to quote Stevie Winwood, "Bring me a higher love," right? Like there are deeper, more important things than a bench press state record, or, and this is my favorite story. My young son at the time, when I came home from setting that record, said, "Oh, how'd you do today?" I told him about the state record. He said, "But was it a world record?" I said, "No, son, it wasn't." And he rubs my back and says, "It's okay, Dad." And and that beautiful perspective is exactly what I needed, right? Where it's like it was kind of a reminder that you are not doing this thing to be the strongest human on earth physically. You were doing this thing to learn about yourself, to push yourself, to help other people in and out of the gym, to have a better perspective and mood. And yes, I mean, I do feel that when we feel good about ourselves, I think that it helps us be more available to other human beings, right? The more we're down on ourselves, which, yes, I mean, people can say the body is important to different degrees. I think it's very difficult to dismiss our physical experience in this life, right? And just say, I don't care how I feel or how I look. Um, Few are the people who truly believe that, I would say. And because of that, I think if we can feel good both about about how we feel to the extent that we can influence our health and what we're capable of, keeping mobile and such into our later years, we become more potentially beneficial to those around us, and not just physically, but I mean emotionally, we can be more willing to give of ourselves because we are in a more positive mind frame, right? So anyway, I'd like to believe that that is how I have embraced the sports that I've embraced.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So obviously we're talking very literally about strength in a physical context when you talk about powerlifting. What is strength to you beyond physical strength? How would you define strength beyond how much weight is on the bar?
So I'd say in recent years of my life, as I've gone through new challenges that I've never faced before, um, I have come to appreciate more and more the term vulnerability, right? Like most people think about the author Brene Brown on this topic, of course, who's written and spoken extensively on it. Um, but I view strong people to me are not people who live by force and coercion and bullying. Those are weak people to me, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that they don't have power and they don't control and they don't, cause things to happen sometimes or pain to be inflicted. But it means that their sort of strength and power has an incredibly small lifespan, right? And we could talk about some of the evil leaders of the earth in here, like Hitler, for example, was exceptionally powerful for a short period of time, and then think about how he's remembered today, right? Um, those on the other hand, who are able to inspire and uplift and actually cause others to decide to make changes in their lives, that to me is incredible strength and power, right? And that's where, yes, from my faith tradition and stuff, I'm thinking about the Savior Jesus Christ. I'm thinking about somebody who understood and lived true principles to such an extent that the most hardened people around him, if they would just open their aperture a teeny bit to let his light in, would all of a sudden see hope, um, would choose forgiveness for others and themselves, and would be willing to you know to fight with and for such a man, right? And so I know those are extreme examples, right? Hitler or Satan and the Savior, but there are so many like smaller degrees of that we see all around us every single day in our lives, and the principles I think are still remain the same, right? Where it's to be good leaders. First of all, we're good followers ourselves. We're striving to speak up when something's amiss, but in ways where we're speaking up because we care about the organization and we care about the leader who's trying as an imperfect human to help the organization himself or herself, right? Um, and so these principles of leadership that I truly believe in, really do flow from my vision of who the Lord of the universe is.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. I've got to play devil's advocate here, Nathaniel, because you've spoken, you've referred to Christ, obviously you've referred to Hitler as well, and these are kind of archetypal opposites. Well, the devil, Satan on one side, and Christ on the other, and these really powerful archetypes, if you like. Even if in terms of whoever is listening, whatever their religious belief is, where they don't believe in them, they can probably accept that these are archetypal diametric opposites. What would you say to, because you have got strong faith, as have I, what would you say to the criticism, just to be devil's advocate here, that Christianity is symbolic of weakness, or what Friedrich Nietzsche referred to as slave morality? How would you how would you counter that? How would you counter the argument that turning the other cheek is weakness?
Well, I like to think in terms of long term, right? Because it's very easy for us to say, um, I don't know if you ever saw The Power of One. Was that a film that you watched about South Africa and apartheid, for example? I know you've been there, Tom, in recent months, even down to visit South Africa. But I love Morgan Freeman in The Power of One, for example, because here he is. A man of color in a camp and who is uh, at different phases in his life is forced to do things that are inhumane, right? He, you know, I won't go into the details, but basically he's forced to do disgusting things as a prisoner of this camp, but he chooses as his last act in life to stand up to oppression, right? And then he's killed for it. Um, and I bring up this example just to say that, you know, it is so easy for us to judge based on any context. We could say, oh, you were a coward at this time because you didn't stand up and you actually submitted to the evil power over you. And then at this time you're a hero. Um, or we can simply appreciate that each one of us in this on this earth is forced to pick our battles. Really, we're forced to decide. We have very strong beliefs and principles, regardless of what they are, and we have to decide every single day: is this a moment where I need to speak up? Where I need to play my card, so to speak. Where I need to maybe even in some cases get physical with the oppression that is in front of me, or is this a time where I recognize the futility of my efforts given the current context and that I have to wait until later? And again, I don't know if the way that I'm describing this is helpful for people, but what I'm saying is that I very much accept the the fact that our lives are complex and that living our values um, can look uh, easily criticizable by those from the outside, right? At any given moment. But I will take a step back and say meekness. We use the term meekness a lot when we talk about the Savior, for example. And meekness is so not weakness, right? Um, to me, some of the most powerful beings that I've been around can dominate a room not by yelling or having their cronies, make sure that everybody shuts up, but because of their presence and because of what people know of who they are and how they live and how in line they are with their real clear values. And that to me is something that, people might criticize it, but I try to be meek in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the status of being meek presupposes that there is strength there and that you choose not to use it with aggression or you choose not to use it vindictively or in a hostile manner. So it is a choice, but it can only be a choice if the strength is there in the first place to be used one way or the other. So yeah, lots to think about there. Thank you for that, Nathaniel. And just to close off, I want to come back to this term persistence, the word persistence, because I think this is so important. Like you said before, about how if you are having a bad day or you towards the end of a bad day and then you go into the gym and you do your session, you can turn that day on its head. And that comes from being persistent, from going and doing the training session anyway, and having a regular habit of doing that. What advice can you give to people about how to be persistent and carry on regardless, making and keeping commitments to train at a high standard?
So the first thing that comes to mind for me is we can't look in the mirror when we get up in the morning and we take our shower and everything and lie to ourselves. Like you're not going to believe it, right? You know you know what's behind those eyes, that face. And obviously, if you're a religious person, you know God knows as well, right? But so, so how do you come to appreciate more your own being and who you are today and who you're becoming, like what trajectory you're on? And I recognize that a lot of people might say, well, running or lifting, or playing football at high levels or whatever it is, like they might dismiss these things and say that doesn't have much to do with your integrity. And yes, there are other ways, right? There are other tools that people can use as their laboratories and such. I find the physical realm to be very poignant and potent in this realm. Um, I from a very young age, again, once I decided I will run this marathon, I put myself on a track, so to speak, from which I was not going to get off. I did the same thing with bodybuilding, with powerlifting, and now, crazy as it may sound, back to running, right? But one thing that's a tool to use. Some of you will be familiar with the book Atomic Habits, for example. But one tool to use is simply putting in place kind of those triggers or those key things where you're making it easier to step into that. Uh, I don't want to say rut because it's a positive rut, but you've created the rut or the track, and now you can just put your train on it and start pushing it down, right? And some of those tools for me will be like when it comes to the gym, I pack my gym bag the night before. Everything's set to go. I'm eating in such a way and at the times that are going to prepare me for that lift. In my case, I am a firm believer in a limited number of supplements that I believe are beneficial in the muscular realm. I know they are, and so I would say, you know, when you've taken you've invested the money, you've taken the supplements, now you have a window to use them. It's just like I don't care how you feel. Again, the train's on the track. Let's go down it, right? That's for a single day. But then when you start to do that day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, and yes, decade after decade, nobody has to tell you that you have integrity when you look in the mirror. You can tell yourself, when I set a goal, that's it. Like I have made the decision, right? And I'm not saying there's never a case where you don't have to pivot or you don't have to change. Again, my hierarchy of values, if my wife or my children have some great need that is coming up right when I was going to train, well, guess what? I'm coming back the next day, and that's fine, right? Understanding that sometimes those pivots can also be huge blessings. Like I just got more muscular and tendon relief than I was used to because I was forced to rest another 24 hours. Fine, there's a benefit there, right? I can see it positively as well. So I hope that helps as one concept of, again, the atomic habits concept, and also just deciding that creating your own self-image and believing the promises you make yourself is a huge part of your success in life. Um, it has been for me, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. I do really appreciate the book Atomic Habits because it does build off Charles Duhigg's book on habits, and it makes it quite clear in a very practical sense. It's one thing is something that I've used with my mentoring clients in the past in terms of making and breaking habits, and I've used it myself. The idea that you can put in, if you really want to do something, if you really want to create a habit of something, it's quite straightforward in terms of the process, in terms of how to do it. So having the desire to do it and having the commitment, like you were saying, when you were 14 preparing for that marathon, are you really committed to do it? Because if you are, then you can find a way to put the steps and the processes in place to make sure that you properly train for it and prepare for it. So that's fantastic. Nathaniel, thank you so much for your time. Just in terms of if anyone wants to get in touch with you, you're on Instagram, aren't you? I think it's Persist Powerlifting is your handle, all one word, Persist Powerlifting on Instagram. Anything else that you would like to say? Anything else that you're working on? Anything that you'd like to give a shout out to just in closing?
So it happens to be Thanksgiving, of course. Here we are in the UK, where I know it's not necessarily celebrated, but I do believe the principle of gratitude, as I've mentioned elsewhere, is critical to our lives, right? And so I would just say that regardless of what sport you're pursuing, or what other endeavors you're into, I think it's a very important practice to focus on what you have been given, what you're able to do for others, your contribution, as you said, Tom, and put those first and foremost in your mind, as opposed to allowing the difficulty of the challenges to bring you down. Right? I think if you put those things first, you're able to cope with and then take on one by one those other aspects of life, which again can beset us at times. That's what I leave you with. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks again for your time, Nathaniel, on the Real Clear Values podcast.
Thank you, Tom.